surface were just like Manson. Were sort of, freaky individuals who had some ideas. And Manson established himself as a guru of sorts at the time, borrowing ideas from what he'd learned of Scientology, and sort of putting together his own bullshit philosophy.
Call it what it is.
And he, for the most part, the people who became part of his orbit, his cult, which would later become, the Manson family, were young women who he enticed with psychedelics and amateur psychiatry, basically, beginning by breaking down their sexual inhibitions and then sort of calling everything else into their lives into question, and somehow he was able to, sort of win these people over, and just his family kept building and building. In the late summer of 1967, Manson's newly established family piled into a redecorated old bus, like a hippie bus, where they take the seats out and put
like a Scooby-Doo bus
and stuff.
Like the Scooby-Doo bus?
Yeah, like a Scooby-Doo bus, probably. Yeah.
More violence.
He does look kind of like Shaggy, doesn't he?
He's a good-looking guy. Look at him. He's got the hair flowing.
He's a creep.
He looks like my dad.
His eyes,
bum chin.
That's freaking me out.
Coming on Charles Manson.
This first picture, by the way, was taken when he was during one of the rare moments where he was on good behavior in one of his reform schools, and he got into the local newspaper or something for being a model, somebody who turned his life around or whatever. But anyway.
Yeah, right.
They thought.
That editor got fired.
So the Manson family piled into a redecorated old hippie bus and traveled up and down the Pacific coast in late 1967 and early 1968, and eventually settled in Los Angeles. In late spring of 1968, Beach Boy... Oh, here we are, the family.
Let's see.
This was all last minute stuff, by the way, which is why it's disorganized or whatever. I didn't know this slide was here. But in late spring of 1968, Beach Boy Dennis Wilson picked up two female hitchhikers who were members of the family. They went back to his house for a few hours and then left. The next morning, Wilson arrived back at his home after a late-night recording session and was greeted by Manson, who was standing in his driveway. Wilson asked Manson if he intended to harm him, and Manson said no, and once again became sort of charming. He actually kissed Dennis Wilson's feet, and started basically becoming like a star worshiper or whatever. Anyway, Dennis was enticed by the lure of free sex and drugs. Once he went inside of his house after the confrontation with Manson, he found that there were 12 strangers, mostly women, who were already in the house, broken in or whatever. But Dennis was a laid-back kind of guy, was a generous kind of guy, and he just sort of let them crash, stick around, because there were, he was kind of a wild guy. There were lots of young women who he didn't question it. Manson just sort of made them available, and there were orgies, there were lots of drugs, and Dennis and Manson had started having philosophical conversations and things like that. Of course, having the Manson family in his house ran up a lot of expenses. They crashed his car after they had borrowed it one night or something. But anyway, they they rang up lots expensive hospital bills because they all had gonorrhea. And eventually, Dennis Wilson's manager said, these people have got to go. They're just, sucking you dry, and basically forced them to leave. But this didn't happen. This was not before Dennis had introduced Manson to Hollywood circles for the first time. People like Terry Melcher, who, as I said before, was a record producer, and his mother was a famous singer and actress. Greg Jacobson, who was a songwriter, Rudy Altobelli, who was the owner of the house where Terry Melcher was staying, and the same house that Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski would later rent and would be the site of the killings. Dennis and his acquaintance, Greg Jacobson, both bankrolled Manson's burgeoning music career by paying for him to make some demo recordings, which were eventually released as an album, and so those songs that you heard come from those sessions. And the Beach Boys actually, before the killings occurred, recorded a Charles Manson song. It was originally called "Cease to Exist," but which was a phrase that was apparently adapted from the Church of Scientology. The title was changed to "Never Learn Not to Love," and that line, the line that contained the word "cease to exist," were changed to "cease to resist." The song was released as the B-side of a Beach Boys single. The single actually hit the charts. Reached number 63, I think, in early 1969.
What was the single?
The song was called "Bluebirds Over the Mountain." By this point, the Beach Boys were pretty unhip, actually.
Okay.
They had declined to play the Monterey Pop Festival and had fallen out with the Los Angeles sort of hip elite or whatever. But anyway, on the single, Dennis Wilson and Charles Manson were co-credited as songwriters. On the album, it was credited only to Dennis Wilson.
How long after the single was the album released, or was it released at the same time? And what happened to that? What happened to that music after the murders? Because the murders were only shortly thereafter.
This is the song. What was your question again?
So what happened to this after the murders?
Well, the album that it was released, this song was released on, came out, I think, a couple of months before. No, I think it came out several months before the murders occurred. The song was never, on the record, was never credited to Charles Manson. The album, because the Beach Boys were not very popular at the time, probably fell out of print at some point, but it was later re-released, and the song was never taken off the album or anything like that.
So there was never there was never media coverage of the fact that this is a Charles Manson song.
I don't think so. There was media coverage. There was extensive media inquiry about the fact that Dennis Wilson had associated with Charles Manson, and Dennis, understandably, really tried to distance himself from that later on, and eventually just wouldn't answer questions about it. Said, I think of all those people, all the victims' families, and said, I want to profit from that. I don't think so, and that was justification. But anyway, yeah. So this is the Manson song. It's a creepy part of the song too. I don't think this song was ever actually, or that part there was on the original song. But anyway, where was I? So that's the Beach Boys' Charles Manson. Sorry. After Manson and the Manson family were kicked out of Dennis Wilson's house, they set up a new base at Spawn's Movie Ranch, which I believe was like had been like a film set at some point, hence the name. And they also later established two headquarters at two mostly neglected ranches near Death Valley. Manson secured his way into one of the ranches by giving the old woman who owned it one of the Beach Boys gold records. An acquaintance of his in Topanga Canyon played the Beatles' White Album for Manson and his new acquaintance Charles Tex Watson around December of 1968. Manson, who was already obsessed with the Beatles, basically took some of the songs on this album as a sign. He already had ideas about how there was going to be a race war soon, and he decided that a bunch of the songs on this album gave clues, subliminal clues about the upcoming race war, and the Beatles had apparently predicted the social turmoil of 1968, including the Martin Luther King assassination and so forth. And several of the songs on the White Album, including Helter Skelter, Blackbird, which was supposed to be about, black people taking over or something, and Piggies, which was supposedly sort of an allegory about, like, mud people and police brutality. Not my words, but anyway. Where was I here? Manson told his followers that the songs that supposedly, contain these subliminal messages about a coming race war, which he termed, Helter Skelter, the coming race apocalypse. The songs were apparently directed specifically at the Manson family, who were being given instructions as to how to prepare for this upcoming apocalypse, which meant they had to move to Death Valley and would be able to escape via some sort of a hole into the earth into a secret city that was underneath Death Valley, apparently.
All very plausible.
Yeah. Manson actually plotted with the family to start writing songs that would trigger Helter Skelter, the racial apocalypse or whatever, so that they could then be prepared, and the black people would apparently triumph, but only temporarily. The family, who were prepared somehow, would eventually come to rule over them after that, after they went down to the underground city or something. But Charles Manson had put together a plan to record these songs and everything. He had talked to his one of his